What's going on, you guys? So for this video, we'll be continuing from where we left off in the last one. And in this one, we will create our endpoints for creating a user, for creating a token, and that will be used for JWT token like authentication, and also retrieving the current user that's signed in. So to begin with, let's jump into our main.py file. And in there, let's first make the necessary imports. So we can say the first thing that we need is the FastAPI library. So import FastAPI as FastAPI. We can also import FastAPI.security, as we'll need that later on. And we can just call this security. And that will be for the OAuth to request form that we'll need. But yeah, you'll see that later on. Import SQL alchemy.orm as _orm. And we can also import services file as services and schemas as _schemas. Just like that. We can create the app. So app equals FastAPI _FastAPI.FastAPI. And then for the first endpoint, we'll do create user. So that will be a post. And we'll say API users. And this will be asynchronous. And we can just say create _user. This will take in two parameters. The first one is the user that we're sending, so like the email and password. And this will use the schemas, or the schema that we made in the last video, which was user create. And the last one is just our database session. So orm.session equals FastAPI.depends. And this will depend on our getDB function that we'll create in a second. So in services, what we can do is create a function that will just retrieve a database session. So if you've seen the last videos, we have something very similar, if not the exact same, there as well. And this function is just get _db. And we need to import the database library. So make sure you have that, and you probably do if you made this create database function. And what we need to do is just say db equals _database.session local, and then try yield db, and then finally db.close. So we don't leave a session like unopened or open, sorry. So back in create user, what we can do is just first of all in FastAPI depends, we can call services.get _db. And the reason why, like when I'm saving, creates a new line is because I have the black formatter. So every time I save, it just reformats it. But yeah, so we can say database user. And the first thing we want to do is check to see if a user has already been created, given a certain email, and we want to handle that ourselves. So in here, back in services, we can say async def get user by email. And this will take in a email, which will be a string, and also the database session. So db _orm, which we don't have. That's what we need to import. So import SQL.orm as _orm. And then here we can just say .session. So get username by email. That will basically query the database. So we can say return db.query, and we can pass in the user model. So here we can say import models as _models. So there we can say _models.user. and then filter the models with the user.email, and then if it's equal to the email that we've passed in, let's get the first user for that. And that will just return a user. So if there is a model, if there is a user that exists given a certain email, then it will return that user. Otherwise, it will just return none. So back here, we can, in main.py, we can say services.get user by email. And we can just pass in user.email. And actually, lastly, the database session, so DB as well. So what we can do now is check. So we can say if DB user, so if the user does exist, we can raise a HTTP exception, and we can say the status code is going to be a 400, and the message will be email already in use. Otherwise, we can go ahead and create it. So back in services.py, we can create a function that creates our user. So we can just say async create underscore user, and that will take in the user underscore schemas. We don't have that, so just import schemas. But back here, we could say schemas dot user create, like that, and then just the database session, so orm.session, and this will first do user underscore object equals models dot user. We can say the email equals the user dot email, the hashed password is what we'll do now. So of course we're sending the email and password. So when a user creates an account, they send their email, they send their password, but the password they send won't already be encrypted. We need to do that ourselves. So in order to do that, in the last video, we installed parslib, and we'll make use of that to hash. So we can do import parslib.hash as underscore hash. And then back down here, we can call that, we can say underscore hash dot bcrypt dot hash, pass in the user hash password, and that will just hash it automatically. It uses like a very heavy encryption scheme, which I think is SHA-256. But yeah, it's really, really secure. So it'll do that for us. And then finally, we can do db.add. So we can add the user object to our database. We can commit that. Then we can refresh on the user object itself. And then finally, just return the user object. And there we go. So back in main.py, what we can do now is call it. So we can say just return await, and then the services.create user, that'll take in a user and db. So we can go ahead and run this now. Hopefully it should work. So if I do uv icon main :app -- reload, hit that back here. So if you go to port 8000 and then on docs, you'll see this Swagger interface. So here, look, we can go ahead and create one. So I hit try it out. Email is Harry at say Hogwarts.com. We'll set, string is hash password is string. Hit execute, and email already in use. I may have already done this before, but we can try something like ron at Hogwarts.com. Execute, already in use as well. Okay. You can tell I'm a Harry Potter fan. Let's do Snape. Execute. Okay, maybe I did something wrong. So in services, we did get user, and I think the reason why it's not working out is filter a user has awaited await. Aha, okay, I think here we need await. So on line 15, or where I have line 15, we have DB user services get user by email. I think we missed out the await there. Maybe that could have been it. So if I try something like, I don't know, John at Hogwarts. So yeah, I executed that now. It's working fine. What was missing was that await. But now what we get back isn't ideal, but it's showing us, it's telling us that it's working. We get the ID of the user, so john at hogwarts.com, the hash password, so not string that I sent. Like the password was literally string. But this is it in its hash form. And then just the email. What you'd kind of want to send back, and what we'll do is send back the token. So when a user registers, they'll automatically be signed in. But this gives us a good indication as to that, in the fact that it's working. So back in main.py, we can go ahead and create another endpoint, and this endpoint will return a token. So when a user logs in, so they'll type in their email and password, and what they'll get back is a token. And that token will allow them to authenticate themselves whenever accessing the authenticated areas of the app. So for that, let's go ahead and create an endpoint, call it app, and it will be post, and we can say /API token, and this will be again asynchronous, and we'll say generate token like so, and this will take in form data. So form data will be using security.oauth to password request form. Bit of a mouthful, but you'll see what that does in a second. And we'll say it depends. And then the next thing is, of course, the database session. So orm.session equals _FastAPI.depends. And then services.get_db. Say pass for now. But what we want to do is back in services, we need to go ahead and create two functions that we'll need. So the first one is a function to authenticate the user. So for that, what we need to do is create an asynchronous function, call it authenticate user. That will take in an email, which is of course a string, and the password that the user enters and submits, along with the database session. So orm.session. So to authenticate them, first of all, let's get the user itself. So let's check to see if the user exists. So await, and then get user by email, database session, and then email. So if not user, then we can just return false. And then if not user dot verify password, and then the password. So remember, verified password is this function that we wrote in the last video. In models, we have this verify password. And what this does is, again, it uses the parslib bcrypt function verify, or library bcrypt. And what it does is it takes the password that we submit in like the login form and the actual hashed password in the database, compares the two and sees if there's a match. If there is, it will return, it will authenticate. Otherwise, if it's not authenticated, we can return false. And this, of course, can be written in one line, but just for clarity. And then lastly, we can just return the user like so. The next function that we want, so before we jump back into main.py, we want a function that will create a token. So async create underscore token. This will take in the user model. And you can tell, like, we will be calling this, it will give us a user, we'll pass that user into this function, this create token, which will then generate our like token. So we can say user underscore object schemas dot user, and this really handy function called from ORM. And what that does, it takes in our model, for example, our user model, and then maps it to our user schema. So for example, ID from our model will be mapped to the user schema ID, email, whatever you have. And then we can say user, just like that. And this now is a user schema object. And then lastly, we can say token equals, and we'll be making use of the library again, which we installed in the last one, which is pyjwt. We can just do import JWT as underscore JWT. And now here we can say the JWT and encode the user object dot dictionary as a dictionary. And then we need to throw in our JWT secret. So to do that, like usually you'd put this in the .env file. However, just to keep it like, I mean, you would do that. We're not like deploying this to production or anything. But in case you are planning on doing something like that, then yeah, I recommend putting this in the .env file. But here we can say my JWT secret. Doesn't matter what you put, just as long as it's a string. And then here, back in the create token, we can just say the JWT secret. And that's now our token. What we can do is return the kind of dictionary response or the JSON response that we're going to have. So we can say return dict, and then the access token. Token equals token. And we can also say the token underscore type. Butterfingers today, bearer. Like so. So that's our authenticate user function and create token function. We can now jump back into main.py and make use of that. So first of all, we can say user equals await, and then services.authenticate user. And then from form data, so this thing that we have here, we can get the email and password. The email itself comes from .username, and username is just like a very generic name. You know, of course, like sometimes it's not an email, it could just be a standalone like username, but I guess username is a very generic word for it. But in our case, this form.username will just be the email, so that's what it's referring to for us. And then here we can say form.data.password, and lastly the database session. And next we can say if not user, then raise underscore FastAPI.http exception, say status code of 401, and the detail we can say invalid credentials. You know, we don't want to tell them that the email is wrong and the password is wrong, just that like in general it's just wrong, just to be secure and safe. So lastly, we can just do await create services.create token, and this will take in the user. And that should be it. So back in the interface, the API interface, we can just refresh. And here you'll see the generate token endpoint. We can use that. And you'll also notice the application is not application / JSON as we have here. It's x /form URL encoded. And we can try it out. We can say username. So I'll do John at Hogwarts. And then string. So put in whatever user you already created if you want to get back the token. Execute. Internal server error. And the issue is in services. This takes in, wrong way around. Yeah, it's, so we can just say db equals db and email equals email. Okay, never mind, mistakes happen. But we can try that again, execute, and there we go. So I get back this access token, which we'll use to authenticate. So we'll send this token every time we're making a request to an area that requires authentication, such as like when we're getting our leads, you know, we want the leads for this user, and this access token is where it will be used. And also just the token type. But if you were to try a user that doesn't exist, say abc@hogwarts.com, execute, we get this invalid credentials with a 401 status code. But that's it when it comes to creating a token. So what we've got now is we have our create user and generate token endpoints. The last thing is one to actually retrieve the user. So we can say app.get, and then we can say API /users-me. And of course, there's no kind of like parameters being thrown in here. Me could mean anyone, but we're saying me as in the actual authenticated user. So we can do response model, and then that will be schemas.user. Oops. And we can do async get user. This will take in the user, which will be a user schema, and that will be based on FastAPI depends, and that will, we need a function to actually get the current user. So back in services, we can say, if I just shrink this a little bit, we can create a function called get current user, and that will be async get current user. This will take in a token, so the token that we get from when logging in, and then we can say FastAPI, and we need to import FastAPI. So we can do import FastAPI as _FastAPI. And this here will be FastAPI.depends. And what we need is the OAuth2 schema. So again, this is something else that we need to add. And in here, we can also import FastAPI.security as _security. And we can do something like the OAuth2 schema equals security.OAuth2, and then OAuth2 password bearer, and this will have the token URL, and that will be API/token, like that. And we can use this in depend, so we can just pass in OAuth2 schema, like so. And then the next thing we just need is just the database session. So DB is ORM.session, and that will equal fast API depends. Actually, we don't really need that. It will just be that. So we'll pass that in anyway. And this, of course, needs to go first. Oops. But now in get current user, we can do try and say the payload equals underscore JWT.decode. So decode the token that we've sent back, which is the exact same one that which would in theory be the one that we get from when logging into the app, but we'll pass it back. So we'll say token and then JWT secret and then algorithms, and it's using HS256. So that's just the encryption algorithm. And then we can do user equals db.query and then the models.user.get, and we say payload and just the ID that's come with that payload. And then we can do accept. So if all else fails, we can do FastAPI.http exception. Say the status code is a 401. And then the detail is invalid email or password. Just like that. And then finally, we can just return the schemas.user from ORM and then just the user that we get. So now back in main.py, what we can do is we can say, so first of all, we have the user that we're getting, and we can have a dependency, which is services.get current user. And this will basically just return user. Very simple. So the error that we're getting is invalid argument for response field. Hint check SQL is a valid pedantic field type. Yeah, so actually back here in the get current user, so what we need to also do is, I was mistaken, so we also need to, with the DB session, we also need to set that as well. So that too, of course, because we're not really passing anything in, so we have to actually set that. So we can say FastAPI depends, and this will just be the get underscore DB. Just like that. So the reason why we're setting it here is because we're not actually passing in a ORM session, unlike like the other examples where we are. In our case, we're not. So we need to do that there. But that should be it now. That should work. Hopefully the terminal is still showing. Yeah, so we're all good. But now back here, we can do this users me, and you'll see two new things. So the first one is this authorize. The second are the lock icons. So what we can do is, if we go here, click on the lock, you can type in the username. So let's say john@hogwarts.com, and then string as password, authorize, did I do the right password? Yeah, so I just typed in the wrong password, but yeah, now we get this kind of, if everything worked out well on your side, we get, you'll see this modal, you can just close it, but now you'll see this lock is now locked, it's no longer unlocked. So what we can do is try this API uses me, try it out, execute, and we get back the email and the ID. So that's the current user. If I were to sign in with like another account, let's actually create one. Let's say create user, try it out, say rhythmic@gmail.com. Save the password, set a string, execute. So now if I first just log out and then back, actually let's try it with, oops. So now if I go, so I've logged out on my old user, and if I go here with that, I can just type in, say, rhythmic. By the way, this isn't my actual email, but string authorize. And now if I were to try out API users me, try it out, I'd get back, execute, I get back rhythmic@gmail.com and with the ID of 4. So that really sums it up. Like we've gone ahead and created an endpoint for creating a user, which takes in a email and password. It hashes it and stores that hashed password in the database. We also have an endpoint for generating the token. And if you're a bit unclear as to how these endpoints will actually work, hopefully they will become a bit more clear when we jump into React. But this token is essentially like our way into the like the secured parts of the API. So you'll create so in this app, you'll create leads. And in order to get those leads, to create leads, to update leads, and to delete them, you will need a token to do that. And this is what this token will do. And with this users-me, we get our just retrieve the user that is signed in, that is authenticated. But actually, one last thing I want to show is if we go to, let's say if we generate a token now, say rhythmic@gmail.com, and the password is string, execute. So if I take this access token, so if I just copy that, and if you go over to JWT IO, and then here, just paste it in, you'll see here like the decoded version of it. So it's telling us like it's type JWT, and the algorithm is HS256, and the payload is rhythmic@gmail.com and ID. So yeah, so it tells us, yeah, like it's it gives us the information from that, and which is quite nice. But yeah, that's really it. That's the last thing I wanted to show you. In the next video, we'll create the endpoints. It won't be as hefty as this video. It's probably the longest one. But we'll look at how to create leads and create all the endpoints regarding that. But other than that, I hope this video gave you some understanding as to how authentication works with FastAPI. And yeah, I have a Discord channel, so feel free to pop by there. But other than that, I hope to see you in the next video.